Hello, my name is Doug Cameron. I'm Dillen Cameron's grandfather, and I'm answering some questions she sent me by email for a project she's doing on civil rights in school. The first question is, how was my family involved in the school integration process? My mother and father, on behalf of their children, sued the schools in Franklin County, Tennessee, to integrate. They sued along with 3 other white families and 4 African American families to integrate the school system, saying that the children of all these families who were in the school were having inferior educations because they were in a segregated school system. And so the court case was based on a case 12 years earlier, Brown versus the Board of Education in Arkansas, where the Supreme Court of the United States said that the old system of separate schools, they were separate but equal, but they said they were not equal, and that you could not receive an equal education. And especially since in the South, the schools really weren't equal. So these 8 families sued the school board in our county, Franklin County, Tennessee. It was the first time there had been an integrated suit, meaning that the plaintiffs, the people who had the complaint, were an integrated group, and we were represented by the NAACP, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. And so it was based on that case 12 years earlier in the Brown versus Board of Education, and it was on behalf of us as children. How did the community respond, she asked. It really divided our community. There were people who supported us and were very helpful, and other people who mostly just stopped talking to us, stopped seeing us socially. You know, we couldn't play after school with these same kids anymore. Their families didn't want them to. And then some people, of course, were very supportive. And Dillen asked, was segregation something you recognized as wrong from a young age, or did you only realize it was a problem later in life? When we grew up, my mother was something of a pioneer. She was a woman doctor, a pediatrician. And so she was at work all the time. And my father was first a professor and then later worked in the college admissions business. And so he was always very busy. And so an African American woman, a wonderful woman named Ruth Hayworth, raised us. She cleaned the house, she cooked, and she took care of us as children. She taught us, she disciplined us, and she had a daughter my age. And so we had an amazing exposure to the African American community. We were invited, often taken down to her house when her daughter might be sick and she had to raise her too, or she would come play with us. And so we were lucky in that way. And I didn't really recognize it, I think, until about the 6th or 7th grade. And we knew things were apart, but there wasn't the violence there was in much of the South that we knew about. I think we were protected by our parents, because I've heard of accounts now, looking back, of lynchings where African Americans were beaten, drugged down the roads, hung, terrible things done to them by just groups, usually of white men. And all that violence was called lynchings, and there were lynchings around us. But our community, being a church-based college community, the hatreds were more subtle. That we moved around together. We worked together and even played together. And then in the 7th grade, I was able to go to the young people's group at our church. And so did a bunch of my African American friends. And the church fathers said, "Oh no, you're moving too fast, slow down." And we said, "Well, they're our friends, why can't they come?" And our EYC advisors, both of whom later became bishops in the Episcopal Church, our EYC advisors supported us and said, "No, they're just, God is love. We're all together." And we actually were able to push the church. And then as I got into high school and could drive, I would go to the NAACP youth group, and we integrated the theaters. I remember going to the roller skating rink and with African American friends and receiving very cold reception. I remember going to swimming holes. We really didn't have a pool. We would go to lakes and often swimming holes in streams in the mountains and the low waterfalls and all. And we would go with our African American friends, and people would get out of the water, go away. So that was sort of standard. Were we mistreated for believing in civil rights? As I said, most of it was subtle. There was some violence in the community. There was one fellow who was picking on our little sister. My brother is not quite 2 years younger than me, and my sister is 6 years younger. And so when a boy started picking on her, Bobby, my younger brother, and I caught him at the lake, and we threatened him. And we didn't learn about Gandhi and Martin Luther King and nonviolence till I was in college. And if they picked on our sisters, we were going to physically threaten them. And we did a similar thing when a friend of ours was beat up because he wouldn't go driving through the black community with some boys throwing bottles and stuff and knocking down mailboxes and all. So, we responded to that in a threatening way to those boys. We did have anonymous phone calls, sometimes just nobody there when we answered the phone. Sometimes threats were expressed, and it really made my mother frightened because Dad was always on the road. By this time, he was working for the College Entrance Exam Board, integrating their southern testing centers, and so she was sort of fearful in that sense, and it also made her very sad that some of her friends would no longer talk to her, but they would certainly still bring their children to see her. And I think that relates a lot to, did your friends or peers disagree or agree with your beliefs? They went both ways. Some friends would not talk to us anymore, and other friends were very supportive and were part of our effort at the church to integrate. And is there anything about the civil rights movement I would like to add? Like a lot of moral movements, it's toughest when it happens at home, when you have to get up and stand up around your friends and say something is wrong. Now it's different sorts of things. I think that with bullying, with mistreatment of people because they're a different race or different religion, or or they may be gay. I think the civil rights is about how we treat one another, and I believe that's the most important measure of a woman or a man, is how they treat other people. And I think also for all of us, the biggest moral question is, do we stand up and say no when things like that are happening? And we haven't solved all the problems of civil rights. We've knocked down some legal barriers, like the segregation of schools, But there are all sorts of subtle interpersonal social barriers that are still there. And so I think your generation has a lot of challenges before it still. So thanks.